So before I begin, I just want to say a couple of things. First, I want to thank you all for inviting me here. And I put a banner on the wall because Josie and I had a conversation about the connections between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And while I'm going to speak on the nuclear weapons complex and nuclear weapons, a friend of mine, a Japanese Buddhist artist, Mayumi Oda, did this beautiful representation, the two-headed dragon, and shows you the entire nuclear fuel cycle. And so I just invite you to take a look at that when there's a break. And also I did put some literature out on the table. Feel free to check that out. And I want to say, since I'm here in Southern California, that there is a Buddhist prayer, vigil, and walk and fast on the week of Buddha's enlightenment at the San Onofre nuclear power plant, and I can get people in touch with the local groups if you would like that. In terms of what I'm going to talk about, I'm Mary Leah Kelly, and I am Executive Director of a nonprofit non-governmental organization in Livermore, California, up in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area, called Tri-Valley Cares, which stands for Communities Against a Radioactive Environment. And we chose our name in part because, and this will be part of what I'm talking about, we wanted to illustrate that not all of the hazards of nuclear weapons are nuclear war. That's certainly the most devastating, the most horrifying, but every part of the nuclear cycle pollutes communities, has health problems, has environmental problems, and about half of our work in Tri-Valley Cares is on that. And that'll be what I talk about in the workshop. What I want to talk about here now is some of the nuclear policy that's going on in the weapons labs and in the weapons complex today. The Plowshares Fund has just done an estimate of what the United States spends now on nuclear weapons. It's a trickier thing to do than it might look like, because some of the money is in the Department of Defense accounts, some of the money is in the Department of Energy accounts. The compensation for workers the Department of Energy made sick in the nuclear weapons complex is in the Department of Labor. But they put together all the different categories and estimated, and they included missile defense in their estimate, that we would spend $640 billion over the next 10 years. So I just want to offer that $640 billion over the next 10 years as a way to say that while nuclear weapons might no longer be on the 6 o'clock news, they're still with us. In the nuclear weapons complex, there are 8 still open, still running major facilities across this country. There are 2 places that have designed every nuclear weapon in the U.S. arsenal. That's the Los Alamos lab in New Mexico, where the Manhattan Project was started and where the weaponeers are still there hard at work today. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that work. And the second one is Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in Livermore, California, where I live in the Bay Area. Livermore Lab today, for most of you, when the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War ended, I mean, that's history. Today, Livermore Lab spends 88% of its annual budget on nuclear weapons activities by their own accounting. This isn't Tri-Valley Cares saying, oh, that's a weapons activity. Nuclear weapons activities is a budget category, and by their own accounting, 88% of their budget is nuclear weapons activities. Livermore Lab was founded in 1952 by Edward Teller and E.O. Lawrence primarily, and its mission was to provide competition for the weapons designers at Los Alamos Lab in order to speed the development of more types of nuclear weapons. I mean, in the beginning, the hydrogen bomb, and now many, many, many permutations thereof. That hasn't changed. I'm going to talk about something called life extension programs. They go through, some of them go through the same process that the nuclear weapons design process went through in the Cold War. When I talk about the reliable replacement warhead, the two weapons labs went head-to-head in a design competition, just like in the Cold War. So things have not changed as much as they could and should. In Jimmy's slide you saw in 1963, there was the Limited Test Ban Treaty that stopped the testing full-scale of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. But it didn't stop their development. The weapons labs had developed ways of testing them full-scale underground. And so nuclear weapons development went on after the Limited Test Ban Treaty. And then in 1992, the US Congress passed the Nuclear Test Moratorium Act, and that stopped full-scale nuclear weapons testing underground in Nevada. But the weapons designers had already been perfecting what was called above-ground testing and ultimately became stockpile stewardship. I love that word, stewardship, but they don't quite mean the same thing by it as what I mean by that word. Stockpile stewardship, to just sort of generalize in a sentence, it takes the exploding nuclear weapon, and each facility does part of it, and then they put it together with supercomputers. But it's not all supercomputers. The Los Alamos lab got a new thing called the Dual-Axis Radiographic Hydrodynamic Test Facility, which, and Livermore has a smaller one of that, which in essence takes your bomb cores, uses mostly depleted uranium, although they're allowed to use some plutonium-242 in it at Los Alamos, blows it up, takes pictures of it, and it helps the bomb designers perfect the design. Livermore got something called the National Ignition Facility, which was relevant to the later stages of an exploding nuclear weapon. Although I have to tell you, while it gets very near the energy density and temperature regimes of an exploding nuclear weapon, it has not achieved ignition. That is, they have not met their scientific mission, which is to create a thermonuclear self-sustaining reaction in a laboratory setting. But they have spent $8 billion of your tax money attempting it. And so I just sort of want you to understand or get a picture of how weapons development is still happening in the United States, in the weapons labs, albeit differently than during the Cold War. There are a couple of, and I also want to, as I talk, I want to give you some idea of how citizen and public action has really, really been the constraining factor here. During the George W. Bush era, Livermore, by the way, Livermore designed the weapon in the current U.S. arsenal that has the largest explosive power, over a megaton. And they were going to modify it to become the Robust Nuclear Earth-Penetrating Bomb. Robust Nuclear Earth-Penetrating Bomb is exactly what it sounds like. It was intended, it was going to be designed to burrow into the earth a ways and then detonate. And it was largely groups like Tri-Valley Cares, groups in Washington, D.C., together talking to Congress, doing education, that and Congress decided not to fund that. And you have to go back to Congress every year because the appropriations process happens every year. But once you can get something defunded 2 or 3 years in a row, you can usually declare victory. And then the weapons labs came back with something called the Reliable Replacement Warhead. So clearly they learned not to name it so clearly what it was. I mean, Reliable Replacement Warhead sounds, pretty benign. The first one was going to be a